Life is full of what-ifs. Some awesome, like what if AI could fold your laundry? And some, well, less awesome, like what if you have unexpected medical costs? United Healthcare can help get you covered with Health Protector Guard fixed indemnity insurance plans. They supplement your primary plan to help you manage out-of-pocket costs. No deductibles, no enrollment periods, and especially no more what-ifs. Visit uh1.com to find the Health Protector Guard plan for you.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
There's never been a faster or easier way to start your weight loss journey than with PlushCare. PlushCare accepts most insurance plans and gives you online access to board-certified physicians who can prescribe FDA-approved weight loss medications like Wegovy and Zepbound for those who qualify. Take charge of your health and speak with a board-certified physician about a weight loss plan that's right for you. Get started today at plushcare.com/weight loss. That's plushcare.com/weight loss. plushcare.com/weight loss.
Hello and welcome to the Napoleonicist. In keeping with the style of Napoleon Month, where we've started to mix things up a little bit, I'm going to bring you a new feature, what I hope will be the first of a series of running features on the Napoleonicist. I am joined by the brilliant Josh Provan. Hello, Josh.
Hi, that's very generous of you.
Josh, as some of you will know if you've listened to the Napoleon's Greatest Battle Part 1 episode, runs the brilliant YouTube channel Adventures in Historyland, and is a general genius and kind of walking encyclopedia in a good way of all things Napoleonic and military history related. And the idea for this one is that we're going to focus very specifically on Napoleon's Marshals. Now, I'm very, very conscious that Epic History TV is doing something themselves on Napoleon's Marshals, and this is in no way intended to step on the brilliant work that is being done there. We're going to run 2 episodes today. Well, today and across the course of this week, looking very specifically at Napoleon's Marshals who served in Spain, and then having looked at 7 individuals in particular, we will then start to look at other individuals who were involved in other campaigns and work out from there. So the idea for this one is that it will be split into 2 parts. We're going to look today at Soult, Victor, Massena and Ney. And then in the second part, we will look at Marmont, Jourdan and Suchet. So we might as well just plunge straight in. Well, actually, no, before we plunge straight in, let's talk about the concept of the Marshalsea, first of all. Brought in 1804, designed to provide the ultimate reward to Napoleon's most capable, but also most loyal subordinates. And I always feel that this is one of those points where it's very, very hard to fault Napoleon. With the Légion d'Honneur, you can always make that criticism that it went to predominantly military individuals. The whole point of the Marshalsea was it was meant to go to military individuals. And this is the ultimate indication, for me at least, that Napoleon was inclined, in the right circumstances, to distribute honours according to ability. And in that sense, that was a continuation of the revolution.
Yes, I think that's definitely fair to say. The Marshalsea was a definite, I mean, yes, overall, it was definitely a merit-based system. Of course, it is, I suppose to be cynical, you would say it was defined by Napoleon's notions of merit, I guess. But nevertheless, that is merit in itself, because as I'm willing to always admit, he was an excellent soldier. And he knew, he could see talent, and that talent is represented most strongly in certainly the first first tier or class of marshals that were formed in 1804. And it's there that you get some of his most legendary subordinates. And yes, this egalitarian idea of if you're good enough, you can have a baton, is definitely at its core Republican sentiment, especially when you consider the rest of Europe at the time. Although, as I think we'll see, what's interesting is that the majority of the marshals, certainly the ones who served in Spain, will all owe something to the old Ancien Regime army that they began their military careers in.
Yeah, that's very true. These individuals have quite a long career, and it will be interesting for us to kind of have a think about to what extent did Napoleon send his best marshals into Spain, or did he actually kind of save them for other operations elsewhere? But that they are a mixed bag, as we're going to look at. I mean, some of them, we're going to start with Soult in just a moment, but others, Massena, for example, bit of a scoundrel, really.
Yeah.
In many respects, both in terms of his love life and his kind of light-fingered attitude towards other people's property. So there isn't a kind of a single personality that fits the bill here.
No, there is no such thing as a typical marshal. The most you could say that would brand a typical marshal of, say, the 1804 class would be that they were originally sergeants and lieutenants in the Royalist Army, generally low-born, or like gentry, the British might call it, low gentry or something like that, yeomen. And a lot of them would have absolutely no problem with deferring to his imperial title because of where they came from.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true. I mean, there's nobody amongst those marshals who strikes me as being questionable in terms of their loyalty. I mean, the very fact that he's handing out martial batons is in itself a way of securing their loyalty if it was ever in doubt. But these are people who, yes, okay, further down the line, they may have turned their back on Napoleon at various stages in their career, whether it's Marmont in 1804, whether it's a number of them who reconcile with the Bourbons and then return to Napoleon, or decide not to return to Napoleon in 1815 during the 100 Days. So loyalty further down the line is another matter, but at the point at which they become a marshal, there's none who spring to mind who have that kind of questions over whether or not they would absolutely follow Napoleon to hell and back, as many of them did in Russia.
Indeed, and Spain, actually, because Russia and Spain are the purgatory and hell of Napoleon's empire.
Yes. I think Spain's probably more purgatory.
I think it is,
Russia, most definitely hell.
Yeah.
Let's start with Soult then.
Okay.
Often touted as one of the best commanders in Spain, possibly one of Napoleon's best marshals, but there are a few who would fight it out quite reasonably for that title. And as you said, this is a guy of humbler origins, son of a baker, joined the army at 16, but then rose very rapidly, in part thanks to the revolution, because within 6 years, he was an officer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another common trait we'll see, is a really quite fast, extremely fast in some cases, rise through the ranks. Soult, what's interesting about Soult is he's actually he's this sort of pervasive, if that's the right word, influence across Napoleon's life. You know, he's actually in a lot of places, and he like many of the Spanish marshals, he suffers a lot from having to constantly face Wellington. And there's that quote that Wellington said about him, which we can bring up later, of course, which suggests that he wasn't terribly good. But what's funny is that it's mostly British people who think that Soult wasn't good, just because of his he dogged Wellington for so long, or was in Spain for so long, and therefore obviously must have been bad or something like that. But actually, I don't think that's the case. Like you say, he was the son of a baker, and he didn't want to be the village baker, so he joined the army in 1785. He was born in 1769, so roughly the same age as Napoleon and Wellington. And he was a general by 1799. As general de division, I think, by 1799, not general de brigade. And then he doesn't have a lot of independent commands, so to speak. He works under Massena in Italy and stuff like that. Yeah, when I was researching him, he was one of the most experienced marshals in 1804. Probably one of the most capable.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, he's there almost the whole way through the big events of the French Revolutionary Army, isn't he? I mean, particularly for Fleurus is where he gets that. Sorry, 1794 is where he gets the promotion to General of Brigade. And then beyond that, I mean, who is it who took the Pratzen Heights? It's Soult. Not a mean feat, but also a demonstration of the trust that Napoleon had in his ability.
Exactly.
And I agree with you, actually, when it comes to his peninsular reputation. I think of all of them, perhaps with the exception of Marmont, who we'll discuss in the second part, I think Soult's one of the ones who came closest to humbugging Wellington, as he would say. I mean, yes, okay, you've got the fact that he's surprised at Oporto. To what extent is that an intelligence breakdown? Well, we could discuss that at some length. And yes, that was quite disastrous. But you've got to think about where else he is. I mean, this is the guy who chased more to Corunna. Okay, he didn't win at Corunna. But again, the demonstration that of all the people that Napoleon could have chosen, he chooses Soult to kick the British into the sea. And fundamentally, he keeps that pressure on well enough that, okay, a different result at Corunna probably wouldn't have made a huge amount of difference. The British were always going to evacuate whatever the outcome. But I particularly look at the Pyrenees campaign and think he came so close, so darn close.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That he was able in 1813-14 to put any defense together after the French had been so badly hammered from 1812 to Vittoria is extraordinary, actually, and to attack and actually get the drop on Wellington. This is after he again did a creditable job of chasing him to the Portuguese border after Burgos. This is a guy not to be messed around with. Tactically, maybe Wellington was right when he said that he knows how to get his troops to a battlefield, but doesn't know what to do with them when he gets them there. That's probably fair. Maybe a bit too unkind, but fair enough, I think, because strategically, Soult was never anything but capable, except at Oporto, as he said, which we must admit was actually really quite bad. But generally speaking, you had to be on the ball against Soult, and like you say, he came really close in the Pyrenees to actually driving Wellington back again.
I mean, the other one that strikes me from Spain is the fact that he's the one against Beresford at Albuera.
Yes. See,
now
this is the thing.
I can't decide whether or not that reflects well on him as a commander, because Beresford made such a hash of the early phase and that redeployment. Surely, in my heart, I want to kind of say, well, look, he had the better of Beresford, but I kind of feel that Beresford made such significant mistakes there that if ever there was a chance to really kick the Anglo-Portuguese army, that was it. And he couldn't quite capitalize. And in one sense, yes, that's because of the doggedness of the resistance of the forces under Beresford. Of all nations, yes, okay, there's controversy over the Spanish, but enough of all nations stood and fought for long enough to allow other troops to move up and alter the situation. I'm just not entirely sure whether Albuera really reflects well on him.
Yeah, no, neither do I, because theoretically speaking, this may be the truth of Wellington's comment about him, because tactically speaking, I think Massena would have completely crushed Beresford if he got the drop on him like that. It was basically Fuentes de Oñoro, but without Wellington taking control of the situation. At Albuera, as far as I've ever read, like you say, it's literally down to the brigades on the right flank standing and dying to stop the French just rolling up the entire flank. That includes, I think it's Zayas's Spaniards and obviously Colborne's brigade. And what it comes down to is Les Beresford's generalship, although his handling of the reserves to the proper place was obviously stellar. But that's more to the stolidity of Line V's column than actually anything Beresford did, and it was basically Soult's to lose, and he lost it. So yeah, it's not actually his finest hour. As he said, he complained himself about the Allied infantry. They were completely beaten, but didn't know it and wouldn't run. So, but he couldn't find the way to beat them. Even when he had cavalry running around in the middle of them, I forget what the details are. I mean, how does one lose that advantage when you've actually routed a whole brigade and you have that many men ready and waiting to surely take advantage of it? It's baffling, actually.
It genuinely is. I can't make head or tail of it. I really can't. I think a lot comes down to actually the individuals on the ground at the time. And as you say, his comment about, these men were beaten, they just weren't prepared to accept that fact. Yeah. And they just kept on fighting. It always has that kind of Python-esque air about the guy with the arm getting cut. It's a flesh wound sort of thing. You can just imagine them going, cavalry to the left, cavalry to the right, infantry over there. It's fine, we can handle this. You know what I mean?
If we run, we're all going to die anyway. So
yeah, true.
So die hard.
Yeah, and indeed they did. Exactly.
But it's Soult's record in Spain is very long. Actually, it's the longest except for Suchet's. I think 1808 to 1804 bar 1 year. I don't think he was in 1813.
No, he wasn't. He was at Bautzen in 1814, wasn't he? And then, of course, was rushed back after the disaster of Vittoria, which again, I think, says a lot about Napoleon perhaps suddenly waking up to the dangers in the Iberian Peninsula because the situation transforms so radically. And that's not to, for once, I'm not being disparaging of Napoleon and saying, he was completely oblivious. He was obviously getting the reports. He was sending feedback onto his marshals and commanders on the ground. In some respects, that was actually part of the problem out in Spain, in that you have each of these individuals kind of pursuing their own agendas, and then you've got Napoleon on high, kind of interfering and sort of attempting to provide unity, but not really achieving it because he's not there on the ground able to make those snap decisions. And by the time the dispatches go from, let's say, Lisbon, where Massena's camped over the winter of 1810-11, to Paris and then back again, plenty can have changed. So I'm not entirely sure to what extent all of the failings of the individuals that we're going to talk to are solely down to their individual attributes, and to what extent there's an issue in the command structure here. It also doesn't help that you've got Joseph in the mix. But to send Soult back in later 1813, I think says a lot about Napoleon's regard for him.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And as we said, he did everything he could. He threw everything at that campaign, and it's just that he was against Wellington, really, that it didn't work out. Because, and then of course, when he was on the defensive, French morale was completely rock bottom. And there was nothing going to stop them. Not Wellington's army at that point. Not with the army he had left. So, yeah. Karen, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and yet Wellington takes a bloody nose at Toulouse, in effect loses.
Well, yes, this is true. This is true. Yes, I was just thinking about the Sororan bit, but yes, Toulouse as well. That is Wellington attacking, and Soult putting up a Wellingtonian defense, where he checks the attacks at every point. There is debate that he was basically lost by the end of the day, and if it had continued the next day, Wellington would have beaten him properly, but he then got out, which again is a very Wellington thing to do. So yeah,
it is.
He was getting somewhere against Wellington, we'll put it that way. I think he was gaining some idea of how to fight the British properly, and his long stretch of service against them makes him actually one of the best generals to fight the British in Spain, and maybe that's why Napoleon sent him back.
I mean, it strikes me that Napoleon is said to have said that if you fight your enemy too often, he learns your way of waging war. And I sort of wonder, building on what you're saying there, whether that's what happens with Soult and Wellington, that actually they know each other, but Soult's starting to learn how do you fight this guy? How do you keep him just at arm's length, or how do you just get that edge, which is never quite enough, admittedly. But yeah, as you say, Toulouse, bloody stalemate, really.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. If you are an admirer, like we are of Wellington, to look at, to wonder what's going on here, old boy, because you're not being as solid as you usually are. I mean, I get the impression Wellington was very prone to dropping into what I call India mode, where he feels that if he's got the enemy running, they'll keep running. So that happened at Burgos, where he just charged off from Madrid, not prepared for a proper siege. He just thought he'd snap up a few more cities before the end of the campaigning season, and paid the price for it. But that was what he would do in India, where he would chase, and he could usually pull off stuff. His old offensive nature, his old audacious nature trips him up now and again. And possibly that's what happened at Toulouse, and Soult was able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring us back to Burgos, because this was another thing that I was thinking of as you were talking, that actually it's quite surprising how rapidly these French armies are able to rally. Take Salamanca, okay, Clausel, not a marshal in command, but I always have huge respect for Clausel's ability to almost on a sixpence just turn the army around, rebuild it, and it caught Wellington by surprise. He was staggered how quickly. It was a broken force after Salamanca. Every single division in the end, if you include Garcia Hernandez, took a mauling at some point over the 22nd and 23rd of July. And yet still he's able to rearm it, turn it around, stabilize its morale, and then take it back on the offensive. Yes, okay, he's got other generals across Spain moving in to support him.
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things about the French army of the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars is how quickly it can, just how flexible the thing is, how easy it almost is to cobble it back together with shoestrings almost. And that's what makes it such a tough force for any conventional European army to take on, because it is just so hard to destroy.
Yeah.
I mean, even Russia, all right, yeah, okay, 43,000 men odd came out of it as a formed body-ish. That's the Guard, basically. But 1813, it's back and still fighting, capable of winning battles. It's ridiculous, and with no cavalry back, practically, no decent cavalry on. So yeah, I think it's just so hard to kill the French army that was born out of the revolution.
It absolutely is. We should also talk about the career post Spain,
which is fascinating for Soult actually as well.
It really is. Waterloo. Do you know, I'm coming across as a Soult sympathizer, which I kind of wasn't expecting at the start of this, but I don't blame him for Waterloo, because he's not the man for the job. Yes, okay, Berthier wasn't available. But I was speaking to Will Fletcher about this recently, who has kind of bottomless knowledge on the workings of staffs, and he makes the point that actually Soult didn't, because Berthier had dominated for so long, nobody really could have stepped into those shoes.
Yeah.
Berthier knew how to translate Napoleon's thoughts into orders that were understandable, and Soult had to kind of hit the ground running and keep up. He hadn't had the opportunity to prepare for that.
Yeah, that's completely the case. The followers of the cult of Napoleon loved to follow Napoleon's lead on blaming Soult, Ney, and Grouchy for the defeat at Waterloo. Okay, yeah, you can accord some blame to each of them for certain things, but the majority of it actually does go to Napoleon, because he chose them for these tasks. Now, it's true, Soult was actually a capable staff officer. He did have the capability to run an efficient staff, but to run Napoleon's staff is a thing again. It's another creature. Napoleon, although he was obviously schooled at Angers and things like that, is a completely original military brain, practically. Everything, kind of like the point I made in the podcast at Rivoli, everything practically he knew about war, he decided was some sort of organic creation that was birthed out of the first Italian campaign. I think he said something actually to the effect that I fought 60 battles or something and know nothing that I didn't know in the first one or something. And so he didn't act with his staff like other generals would. And it's infamous that only Berthier was able to properly formalize what the babble that was coming out of his mouth, practically, to make it into understandable orders. So yeah, this is completely the case. It's probably I've read opinions by other like historians and experts and things saying that Soult probably should have had Ney's job, and Ney maybe should have had Grouchy's job or something like that, or Ney should have just been a corps commander or something like that. And that I've read that, the chaps who went with him to Saint Helena, Montalon, and I've forgotten the name of the other guy, but the master of the household and stuff. Someone wrote that they were the only ones who worked with Napoleon close enough to probably be able to do Berthier's job at Waterloo. And Soult didn't really stand a chance, really, on being able to fill Berthier's shoes. I don't think you do feel quite a bit of sympathy for him in this, and he remains blamed for Waterloo and defeated Napoleon, and his sort of as you were saying at the beginning, he's one of the ones who somewhat switches coats. He was quite happy to serve the Bourbons when they came back, quite happy to return to Napoleon when he came back, equally happily to make friends again with the Bourbons.
Well, he was Minister of War, wasn't he?
He was, yes, and he actually became the Grand Old Man of the French Army because he was one of the longest-lived marshals, and he was named Marshal General in the 1840s, I think, which only Turenne, Condé, and de Saxe had been given this title before. And of course, he wasn't really in their league, but he was like the greatest soldier left surviving, except for Marmont, I think, and nobody really wanted to talk to him.
Nobody wanted to talk to Marmont. No.
And Soult lived to like 1851, and he was at Queen Victoria's coronation. Apparently, he saw the Duke of Wellington there, snuck up behind him, grabbed his shoulder, and said, "Aha! I have you at last." And he's a fascinating guy. Ruined overall reputation because of Waterloo and Napoleon.
I think we have a consensus here, don't we? Yeah. Which is Soult treated quite harshly, perhaps too harshly by armchair generals such as ourselves for the most part. And perhaps there's a strong argument to be made for a kinder interpretation of the guy.
I think
so.
I mean, he was
to discuss.
I think so. He was a capable man. He was a bit pompous. He briefly wanted to become king of Portugal or something like that, and was miffed because Murat got king of Naples and thought he was an idiot. So he thought he should be able to be king of Portugal, and he was an inveterate looter as well. A lot of the stuff he took from Spain is still in France. But yes, I think generally speaking, as a soldier, I think we agree on this point that there's more to be said about Soult than just his performance against Wellington and his supposed ineptitude at Waterloo.
Absolutely. Let's move on to perhaps somebody who doesn't get as much limelight in discussions about the Peninsular Wars, which is Claude Victor, the Duc de Bellune. Was an artilleryman at Toulon, so quite obviously had a very long association with Napoleon off the back of that. Like Napoleon and like Soult before him, rose very rapidly. He was a general of brigade at the age of 27, so younger than I am, even with my whole kind of baby-faced thing going on. By 33, 6 years later, he's a general of division. So one of these people who very quickly finds his way up the ranks and was with Napoleon as one of his chief subordinates at Marengo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's an interesting one because he is not of the class of 1804, and he's older than most of the marshals actually because he was born in 1764, I think. And like you say, he had a long association with Napoleon. He was made general of division by Napoleon himself 3 days after the Battle of Rivoli. And but again, a little like Soult, before he became a marshal, and in fact, actually, Claude Victor Perrin, as his full name was, Victor, as everyone calls him for some reason. But actually, he called himself Victor, that's why. It's like, because he became a marshal in 1807, so in terms of independent command, Spain was his first big shot. And there are a couple of marshals for whom Spain, they had perfectly fine careers as kind of subordinate commanders up to Spain. And Spain was their chance to shine and get his title, basically. I mean, one of the things we didn't say about Soult was that thing about he was a Duke of Dalmatia, but he should have been Duke of Austerlitz. That thing about the British calling him the Duke of Damnation because of the Coruña campaign. But this is the sort of thing we're talking about. Napoleon would give titles to people once they'd done something clever in various parts of the country. And this was his chance to get, like, I don't know, Duke of Talavera or whatever, because that was his first battle against Wellington, unfortunately. But he did okay against the Spanish forces. He had pretty unbroken successes against the Spanish armies.
Yeah, absolutely. Espinosa, Medellin, did very well. I mean, it's interesting what you say about how he's not one of the 1804 class. It was something else that occurred to me, because he gets it at Friedland, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So why not one of the 1804 class, in your opinion?
I don't have an answer for that, to be honest. Napoleon's selection of marshals is actually quite mysterious. All I could kind of come up with when I was looking at the Spanish marshals anyway, was that they're, like I said at the beginning, they're all quite brilliant people who are able to rise through the ranks in some way or another. They're all intelligent. They're all fairly low born. The majority of them lower born than Napoleon, so they wouldn't have any problem with sort of deferring to him. And all of them obviously were, I think those are the two main things that typify a marshal. But why? And Victor had done a lot of small stuff, but although he knew Napoleon for quite a long time, he didn't seem to be on the radar for some reason until Friedland. He was a brigade commander under Massena, for instance. So he was a brigade commander under a much more brilliant general. So perhaps he was a little covered in terms of distinction. But there were a couple of people who were miffed they didn't get the 1804 battle. Victor isn't particularly one of them who was miffed about it. He was actually kind of a mild chap, I guess. Not someone who stirred the pot very much. He was known for his good looks and general competence. And like I say, Spain was his first big break. It was going quite well until 1808. And to be honest, even Talavera, he did his best. He got the drop on Wellington and Cuesta on the first days for certain. But then it kind of unraveled. And of course, then it was Barroso.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it strikes me that, again, I wasn't expecting to be quite so sympathetic when I first kind of thought about these individuals, but the more I've kind of dwelt on it, the more I kind of feel that Victor was doing the right things at Talavera and indeed at Barossa initially. The plan was the right one when you look at what they knew of Wellington and what they knew of the Spanish at that point in time. Okay, Wellington's not at Barossa, we'll get to that in a moment. But Talavera, night assault, really audacious, but striking whilst the iron is hot, knowing that the Spanish are a weakened force and therefore Wellington's put them in the most secure part of the line, but kind of rattling their cage a little bit with that just farcical incident where a whole battalion fires on advancing French cavalry and they're just so scared by its own gunfire that it rounds and runs away to the town, pillages its way through the town, and then kind of careers into the light division, which is trying to reach the battle.
That was hilarious. Yeah, it's so farcical. Yeah, Cuesta was so angry he wanted to shoot every officer, and Wellington had to stop him.
Yeah, absolutely. Wellington was the one who stepped in and said, "No, that might not necessarily be a good idea to just start executing your officers." But he does the right thing. Goes for the high ground. Yes, again, it's a very basic tactic, but goes for the high ground, takes the hill, nearly manages it. Yes, is pushed back eventually in that very confused fighting.
Mm.
But there's no reason at that moment in time why you wouldn't think to take the fight to Wellington and to Cuesta. This isn't, sort of Marmont in 1811, 1812, having seen a certain story play out that Wellington's very good at holding a ridge and you don't want to fight him on ground of his choosing. They don't have that precedent. Yes, okay, there's been Relitha, there's been Vimero, but that's not enough to kind of prove the rule, is it? And the most recent engagement has been at Porto, where Wellington's gone on the offensive, so that there isn't that kind of reputation of a defensive general, erroneous though it was, to have been formed.
No, indeed, yes, it's a good point. Relitha, he attacked. Vimero, he defended, but was actually attacking strategically. Oporto, all attack. No, the French had no reason to think that this guy was anything other than, and he was invading Spain as well, seeking a battle. So as far as they were concerned, they had checked him. He should have been reeling, and they were going to, like you say, strike while the iron was hot. And obviously, the performance of the Spanish the day before gave them no reason to, and the British, to be honest, gave them no reason to think that they didn't have a card to play here. So yeah, it was perfectly reasonable to try and actually take that bridge by force. The incident with the Spanish actually being a teachable moment to all of those who feel that unsteady troops should fire at cavalry at any range. Once you unload those muskets, and that's what frightened them, they were absolutely vulnerable to being charged. And so they panicked and fled. That's bad, obviously, regimental control. But, to a French army, very professional French army by 1809, led by a solid chap like Victor. I think Jourdan showed up as well, didn't he?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I believe Because there are three of them, aren't there? There's Joseph, there's Victor. I think you're right. I think Jourdan is there.
If Joseph shows up, Jourdan's probably there too, because he was chief of staff or something like that. But Victor had, I think, tactical command. And yeah, there's no that's a good point. Talavera was fought with every expectation. You can't fault the idea, basically. And that was a bruising awakening to.
So let's talk about Barossa then, because again, I kind of feel that the sentiment was right. You've got the British and Spanish force. They haven't gone on the offensive as was expected. They're quite clearly at that stage making a break for the safety of Cadiz, having essentially walked pointlessly across the peninsula and wasted provisions in the process. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's fault on many sides here, because the Spanish famously don't move to support the British. And so the Brits are kind of left on their own. And so there is an argument to be made that actually, had the Spanish moved, perhaps this might not have played out quite so well. But I kind of feel that the idea was good. You know, the British have their back more or less to the sea. If ever there was a moment to really kind of give them a hammer, they've got nowhere to go. It was a good concept, it feels to me. What's your take on it?
Well, Barossa is obviously one of the more little-known battles, even though it's the first battle in which an eagle was taken in combat. And it was a British attacking, actually, wasn't it? And yeah, I mean, again, it's a solid. Victor is just completely solid in his appreciation of the tactical and strategic situation. I guess he just is consistent. It seems like he's consistently underestimating the strength of the British infantry, I guess, by the standards that he would have been aware of, even though he fought the Russians at Friedland and they had very, very tough infantry. He just seems to he makes solid calls, but in the circumstances they're the wrong calls, because the British army is really quite a tough thing in that period, and is able to do things in a linear fashion that other armies don't do. And so in that situation, you just don't want to be attacked by them. And he allowed them to get the initiative and attack him, even though on paper he should have actually been able to deal with it. So again, I don't think any egregious mistake was made at Barossa. He just lost, basically, because Graham managed to take the initiative.
It's an odd one, isn't it? Because it kind of, you've got the French appear. The British are moving back from the heights because they're planning to move back into behind effectively the fortifications, and then suddenly everybody kind of has to turn around, and it's what I can't remember the name of the unit off the top of my head, which is bugging me. But one of the units has to retake the heights, in effect, which the French are pretty much there. And so you kind of have this race that the British effectively lose. And so they're having to kind of fire and fight their way uphill. So the attacker kind of suddenly becomes the attack. It's a really odd one. It strikes me.
Yeah, it is.
Another Albuera, in a way. You know, the British are beaten, they just don't flaming know it.
Yeah. And in this one, it's really made up on the spur of the moment, because Victor, like we just said, that's the right call. The British are retreating. If I get the high ground, I can pound them as they go with artillery. Now Graham sees this, makes exactly the counter right call. Don't let them take that height. We need to hold that if we're going to get into the city safely. That, of course, means we have to run back up the hill and take it. And apparently this works.
It's not something that you'd play in a war game, would you?
No.
You know, you run the numbers and go, no, not going to try that. That's not going to work. Yeah. So again, I kind of have sympathy for Victor.
Yeah, bad
and
luck, really, I think.
that's genuinely what I was thinking. In fact, I've got a side note in my notes. Is this just a case of he makes the right calls and gets unlucky?
Because there's that thing where you make a good kind of move. You see it in some battles. Generals will make what is a safe and probably positive move. That is now an action. Anything now that upsets that is actually quite dangerous, though, because that now is in movement, and to change that plan to a defensive posture and have like martial reserves and things like that is going to be quite dodgy to pull off if the enemy is audacious and just goes for you, because everybody's doing one thing and now you have to make them do another thing. And that actually upsets the French a few times in Spain.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely does. And we should also talk about, again, the post-Spanish career. Let's not just kind of give people the impression that all we care about is what happens in Spain. Because it's Victor who plays the key role in getting what was left of Napoleon's army out at Berezina, first of all. And then there are other things that are worth mentioning in 1813. So he's at Dresden and Leipzig, is removed from command at Montereau. But then this is a mark of the caliber of the guy. He refuses that order because he wants to kind of earn his reputation back, and then succeeded. He fought bravely alongside his men and was given command of the Imperial Guard, or an element of the Imperial Guard.
Yes. Again, he doesn't do. He kind of proves that he's actually a good general when he goes back to fight under Napoleon. Whether that means that he's another one of those marshals who just does better when he's got a superior officer over him, therefore the mission is simplified, or not is open to interpretation. But yeah, at Berezina, he's the rear guard, not Ney, and he holds enough for the Imperial Guard and what was left of Eugène and Davout's shattered cause to get across, and that is all credit to him with that amount of Russians bearing down on them. And like you say, again, nothing but stellar performances during the later campaigns. I think he's the only reason, to be honest, he stops fighting is because he gets wounded at Craonne, I think. And thereafter, when he stops fighting, of course, it's very interesting, is that he, like Soult, very practically, basically decides to be a royalist. And maybe it's more understandable with Victor because he lived longer under the ancient regime. Maybe he understood that world a little better, so he didn't really mind a more constitutionally based royal family. He didn't join up with Napoleon when he came back in 1815 for certain. He went to Ghent with Louis. So when they were fighting at Waterloo, he was over at Ghent listening to the gunfire with King Louis, and he voted for the death of Ney as well.
He did, yeah. I mean, this strikes me as somebody who is not only brave, but also has the integrity of being a man of their word. You can't really, in my opinion, criticize him for seeing the writing on the wall and deciding, you know what, Napoleon is a spent force come 1814. The empire has fallen. I need to consider my career options, and the Bourbons are the logical choice. So I don't blame him for that switch. Where I have issue with some of these marshals is that when they think that the grass is greener on the other side, when Napoleon comes back, they ditch their oaths, in effect their honor, I would argue, and they join Napoleon. And Victor is not one of those. He stays with the Bourbons.
That's a good point. I mean, we know that the cult of Napoleon places a great deal of credit of importance on honor, but only honor to Napoleon, not personal honor. Now, Napoleon has actually signed a document of abdication, a legal document saying, I give up. That technically releases everybody who is not on his personal island in Elba from loyalty to him. So, okay, that actually leaves them free to be royalists, to serve the new King of France, or the old King of France, but the old regime. Now, when he comes back, that's illegal, technically, even though, of course, he says that because they broke their agreement about the pension for the King of Rome and stuff, so maybe that's a fair point, but whatever. He actually comes back and invades France. That is an illegal act by the terms of the treaty, and anybody who then went back to him is literally committing treason, especially people, unfortunately, like Ney and all the other ones who, some of them didn't get shot, so they were just making an example of Ney, I guess. But yeah, Victor is not one of them. He understands, I've given my word to King Louis. It's illegal for me on many levels to go back to Napoleon now. And besides, we've said it before, this is an absurd plan in 1815. You have to be an idiot to go back to Napoleon at this point, really. Especially after you've seen the chaos of 1814. So what they thought was going to be different now, I don't know. But Victor wasn't one of them, and as a result, he was able to live out his life as a peer and a general of the second restoration, third restoration, one of the restorations.
So let's go from somebody who demonstrated honor and integrity and talk about somebody whose honor and integrity might be open to question, which is Andre Massena. Wanted to be a sailor originally, but then switched to the army when he found it wasn't for him. Rose to be a sergeant, so another one of those who comes from the bottom, works their way up. Was released from the army in 1789, apologies, but then joined the National Guard 2 years later. Within a couple of years was a colonel, voted a colonel, we should say. Was general of division after Lenato, 1795. Plays a key role in the Italian campaign, Lodi, Castiglione, Bassano, Caldiero, Arcole, Rivoli. So again he's not with Napoleon right from the beginning, but has that association and plays an active role and is trusted by Napoleon.
Yeah, this guy is a man that Napoleon relied on heavily in the first Italian campaign, and would rely on heavily almost until Spain, practically speaking. He is like Napoleon in many ways, actually. People say he might have been as good as Napoleon, actually, in his prime. They both obviously were what you might call ethnic Italians for a start, so there's that similarity. And Massena is just like Napoleon called him. He was the darling child of victory or something like that. He could do things in battle. He could do things in campaigns. I mean, he in the precursor to Marengo in 1779, he went up against Suvorov and the Austrians, and that's no mean feat. And because he was able to take out the Austrians and Russians at Zurich, I believe, he was able to basically force Suvorov to have to get out of Italy and march back over the Alps. And that's why he thought he should have been given the title of Zurich. There was a lot of wrangling about what titles the marshals should get, but Massena was absolutely going to be a marshal in 1804. There was no doubt about it. That this guy, Davout and Soult, Lannes, top 5 marshals easily. I think in 1804, and he's also Massena is a fascinating guy, really, because he understands Napoleon like few of the others do. He gets the measure of him very quickly, and there's always this kind of uncertainty between Napoleon and Massena, because Massena understands what Napoleon is at, and he has the most delightful dry sarcasm when it comes to Napoleon as well. Practically anything Napoleon says in his presence, he has some sort of observation to make, and few of the other marshals do that. And yeah, like Soult, he's much more brilliant than Soult, but in personality, he's also an inveterate looter. He gets removed from command in Italy because he runs such a corrupt government, local government, and he also is a little bit of a ladies' man as well, which is neither here nor there, I guess. People bring it up a lot, but if you want to bring a mistress on campaign, it's not my business.
This is true. I mean, you say looting in Italy, but am I right in thinking that there's a similar issue in Naples? And actually, when you think about what happens in Portugal during the 1810 invasion, Coimbra, mass looting there, no effort really made to quell the looting.
He's not interested.
No. More interested actually in his mistress.
Yes.
And on the subject of his mistress, there is that brilliant story about a dragoon having to inform him the night before Busaco of the news that Wellington has stopped on Busaco Ridge. But how do we put this delicately? Massena is busy entertaining his mistress. And as a result, the conversation has to happen through the medium of a bedroom door. This is not a man whose mind is in the game.
Yeah, and I think that is absolutely actually a good way of getting to his performance in performance in Spain. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But he is not at all committed to this. He first of all, the choice to send Massena to Spain kind of almost shows how little Napoleon thought there was to do there, because Massena had no enthusiasm for it. He was already I think it was what was he, Duke of Elchingen or something like that, or Prince of Elchingen or something, for his last kind of successful bit of soldiering in 1809 against the Austrians, where he performed again with his old style. But he really seemed to just have had enough by 1810. He really wasn't, I don't think he was really interested in fighting anymore. I think he wanted to retire, to be honest, with a nice title, his mistress, and whatever loot he had collected in Italy. And going to Spain, not even Spain, going to Portugal for a start, it's just not interested in doing any more brilliant soldiering, and he thought he could probably play it by numbers. Hence, he brought along his mistress, and his performance against Wellington in the invasion of Portugal to begin with was nothing if not just, well, to use colourful language, half-assed. It was like he was just playing it by numbers. Okay, I'll go in, I'll take the border fortresses. Okay, I'll just invade now. Oh, they're on top of a ridge. Well, we'll just attack them. We're good. We're the French army. This is what we do. We can take that. And then Busaco happens. And well, it doesn't go well. And then he kind of clicks into proper Massena mode, and he goes, okay, we should have gone around by Coimbra to begin with. Let's turn the position. And obviously he wasted a lot of men doing what didn't need to happen. Sending him to the peninsula was weird, because he was bad for PR, because he looted and let people loot, and he just wasn't particularly interested. His individualism and acerbic nature meant he didn't get on well with other commanders. He quarreled with Ney endlessly, and so it took him a while to actually start showing he was going to be, that he was still good. But I feel certainly that he was probably passing his prime just because he was losing interest in soldiering.
Yeah, I mean, see, unlike some of the others where I kind of expected to have a slightly harsher opinion, and my judgment has the more I've looked into this has softened. it's the reverse with me for Massena. Because he was so good in Italy, I kind of look at what happens in the third invasion of Portugal and think this could have been so much better. Yes, Wellington had planned meticulously with the lines of Torres Vedras that we all know about. And yes, once he was in front of the lines of Torres Vedras, there was nothing he could do to send, particularly having fought Basaka already, to just send men against these positions would have been suicidal, even with the advantage of numbers. But as you say, it does feel like he's playing this kind of steady, methodical, uninspiring almost, kind of this game of, there are some fortresses, let's take those. Okay, he can't go into Spain until he takes into Portugal until he takes those fortresses. But beyond that, he takes Almeida much sooner because of the explosion of the magazine there. I can't help but feel there was potentially scope for something more dynamic and more intelligent, particularly at Basako, where the Wellington's left was just sort of in the air. Once you come down off of Basako Ridge, there's a road. You just, bit of basic reconnaissance, outflank the position, perhaps even pin Wellington with a frontal assault while sending another force on a night march. And yes, I can being an armchair general and kind of thinking with the benefit of hindsight.
Well, that's what he did at Fuentes on Oñoro.
Precisely.
He pinned him in the front and tried to hook around the flank. So he knew exactly what to do against a good defender. But he just didn't do it at Basaka. And actually, the case to be made against Massena in 1810 is that he just didn't care about reconnaissance. Once he got into Portugal, which to be honest terrain is not actually that different from northern Italy and the campaigns he was doing around there. So he should have been well able to navigate through valleys and mountains and do 10 bad, like dodgy positions. But reconnaissance, it's like he didn't bother to scout the Basaka position to see if he could turn it. Then once he had turned it, he didn't bother to scout ahead to see if there was to find Torres Vedras, because there's that bit where he comes up in front of it, and then he considers the position. He takes a day and he kind of reconnoiters it personally. And there's a funny bit where there's a British artillery gunner fires a shot at him, and he just sort of doffs his hat and turns around, and then he addresses some questions to two loyal, I suppose traitorous Portuguese officers, and goes, "Why didn't you tell me this was here?" And he says, "Well, they say we didn't know it was here," and then sort of shamefacedly go, "Well, must have been working for a really long time there, don't you think?" And he goes, "The devil! Wellington did not make the mountains," and he did. That is what I think. That's why I think he wasn't really caring, because he didn't care to look in front of him when he was fighting Wellington in 1810, and it's like he's 52, he's getting into middle age, and he's not bothered. He's not bothered until he loses so badly in 1810. He kind of, his pride is stung. And he realized, okay, I have a fight on my hands now. I actually have to get myself out of this hole. And in 1811, he puts up a better show.
But while sitting before the lines of Torres Vedras, is not overly concerned about, as you said earlier, kind of PR, about relations with the Portuguese. And in very graphic accounts of the British advance afterwards, we see soldiers from all ranks turning around and describing horrific barbarism that they see the Portuguese have been subjected to.
It's another example. It could be another example of Massena's disinterest in stopping looting and things like that, and really his general disinterest in fighting a kind of a proper campaign, a properly ordered campaign. His army is in a pretty bad state, except for Ney, who does a splendid job with the rear guard, who basically just decides to I'm just going to go on my own now. You just get the heck out of Portugal, leave me to my own devices. And Massena is mostly interested in getting out of Portugal and rallying the army outside of it. And whatever they do on the way is not his business, I think. I think that's probably at the heart of it. I'm not sure and to be honest, I think it was partially his cold-blooded, possibly instinct for, like Napoleon's little cold-blooded instinct for war, which was, if you can do enough damage, it kind of slows the enemy down. So, woe to the civilians, really. This is war, kind of thing. Possibly that. But there's no doubt about it. His inability or disinterest in trying to control the deprivations is a black mark against him, even though he was, in most other cases, in some cases, he could be quite intelligent when it came to trying to win hearts and minds and stuff, but sometimes it just priorities seemed to overweigh one, and some priorities were greater to him than others, and at that moment getting out of Portugal was the priority. He didn't care about how they got out, I guess.
And then we come to what is in effect the final act of his career, which is Fiorente Don Euro, which is, as you said earlier, much more imaginative, and on 2 occasions comes very close to achieving what he sent out to do. But this is Wellington on ground of his choosing. Yes, a position which we can rightly criticize Wellington for, because you've got the river not to his back, but if the Allied army had broken, trying to get men back across that river would have been an absolute nightmare. There's no 2 ways about that. But this is much more like it, if you will. Nearly achieves the breakthrough through the village, takes it right up to the churchyard. You've got the vicious fighting happening amongst the headstones, ultimately pushed back, but only after reserves are sent in. And then there's the whole business of what happens on the right flank, which is incredible. Wellington makes a blunder and overextends his right. And, talk about a man on the ball, sees it and goes, right, I'm going to move in and just roll up the Allied right flank. And by God, did he nearly succeed?
He really did nearly, actually. It's fascinating that actually the only thing that went wrong was that was sort of that he let it get away from him. That the attack went in, it went well, but he seemed to suddenly draw focus in on the village and then sort of forgot about the left flank, which allowed, I guess, Wellington to respond the way he did, which was to refuse the entire right center. But yeah, that as one officer said, they completely turned Wellington's right flank, and they were within an ace of destroying was it the 7th or the 4th Division?
It's the Light who goes into...
Yeah, they go to rescue one of the others.
I think it's the 7th that's out there.
Yeah, and they come very close to completely rolling up the flank. Like you say, this is why you just do not leave an open flank in front of Marshal Massena, because when he's on the ball, he'll find it and he'll make you pay for not anchoring it. And if he had paid more personal attention, I don't think he actually went out onto his left flank to control it himself, or even reinforced it after the first successes to try and even pin down the Light Division when it came out to help them. Maybe Wellington would have had to actually got the heck out of there, and then, as you say, had his back against a river, and who knows what might have happened, to be honest. But he let it get away from him. He let Wellington regain some tempo. He allowed Wellington to get his divisions back. But that was a very dodgy situation, and Wellington just held on. because Massena intuitively saw he is committing everything to his center. I've actually got him convinced I want to crush his center. So I'll do an attack on the left. I wonder, is he actually thinking this is just going to be a massive demonstration and I'm going to punch through the center? Or does he actually want to break Waddington's right? Because the way he acts is more as if he wants Waddington to weaken his center so he can get through the middle.
Yeah, that's a good argument. I mean, there is so much of a fixation around the village and the fighting around the village. But yeah, I don't know is the honest answer, but it's a really interesting question. Yeah, I've never really kind of thought about it that way, but it is, I mean, he's got to do one or the other, hasn't he? I mean, it kind of, if you attack on the left, either you're going to roll up Wellington's right flank, the French left are going to sweep in, or the centre is going to have to be weakened in order to stabilise the Allied flank.
So actually, again, like a lot of what we've just been saying about the other marshals, this is a good plan because it gives him many options. It just, he doesn't take advantage of the option that happens, of the advantage that he gains on Wellington's right, on his left, it seems, Fuentes. And again, I think we should also point out that what Peter Young said about Massena, and even he also includes Marmont in this, that Marmont never pressed a battle beyond the logical point. So when the attacks failed, he stopped fighting. This is something Napoleon would fail to do at Waterloo.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And as you say, is also true of Marmont, who, funnily enough, supersedes Massena a few days later. Yes, so you don't have a situation where the French army fights itself to its own destruction. So, yeah, a better battle at Fuente on many levels. But I expected more from the guy, and 1810 and the history of plunder, it just sort of doesn't sit particularly well with me. Gifted though he was. No,
it just screams that he didn't want the job and didn't want to have to work this hard to do it.
Let's talk about one more before we wrap this part up. We'll talk about others in the second section, which is somebody we've talked about a fair amount already, Massena and Ney, the Prince of Moskva. Napoleon himself called him the bravest of the brave. His bravery was beyond question. At whatever point you want to look at his career, he was in the thick of the fighting and was incredible at that craft. And we've mentioned about him being given rear guards during the withdrawal, particularly from Portugal. He's also in the rear guard in the withdrawal from Russia. Arguably has PTSD post Russia, is a cavalryman by his nature. Hussars in 1787, I believe it is, and then rises up through the ranks.
I think so. Yeah.
And there's a lot of the big actions. Hohenlinden springs to mind. Jena, Eylau, Friedland. He's at Busaco, does very well at Busaco. But then, of course, things go quite badly wrong after Russia, in my opinion. The big ones there being Quatre-Bras, Waterloo, an absolute mess. So, I mean, if I was going to summarize Ney in a single phrase, it would be incredibly brave, but not a great tactical mind.
Yeah, he's a funny one, Ney. He's like Napoleon's. He's like one of Napoleon's favorite tools. Like you say, he's in almost all of the major battles. He's quite brilliant when he has a simple goal to achieve, but usually gets lost in minutiae if he's left to his own devices. Therefore, in Portugal, he was given the job protect the rear of Massena's army, and he did that very well against the light division. And as has been pointed out on Twitter recently, he can be argued that at the combat of Radina, he actually got the better of Wellington in a defensive battle where he made Wellington think he was the entire French army. And but he did. The reason that I guess Ney won't take very long to talk about is because he doesn't actually command in Spain. Once that campaign is over, he actually goes back to Central Europe, and obviously 1812, where he becomes the in quotes bravest of the brave. It's interesting to note that that is very much a byproduct of his own mistakes and Napoleon's misjudgments, where Davout's corps cuts Ney off and leaves him stranded in a Russian city. And then all of the French concentrated at a place called Krasny. There's a battle there. Napoleon's afraid of being cut off, and he marches away, allowing the Russians under General Miloradovich to cut the road to Krasny before Ney can get to Napoleon. He is now cut off, and this is the destruction of Ney's corps. He tries to fight his way through. He loses ridiculous amounts of men. The entire corps just goes to pieces. But he personally manages to get like 400 or 500 men out of the wreckage that he has created and Napoleon has left him with. And that's why he's called the bravest of the brave, because of 3 days of trying to get the heck out away from the Cossacks in 1812. Then at Quatre Bras, as you say, because his Spanish career is quite limited, but he was there and he was a marshal when he was in it, and he did creditably well in Spain. I'm not sure if he had commanded in Spain, he would have done any better than the others. He fought well at Quatre Bras, I guess. The real problem with Quatre Bras is the day after, where he just sits there and does nothing, and lets Wellington just walk away. That's inexplicable. At Quatre Bras, you can argue certain things were out of his control. But
yeah, I mean, Quatre Bras, he's learned. He hasn't done what Napoleon is said to have done on the morning of the Battle of Waterloo itself, and just dismiss Wellington, perhaps because he's been at Asarco. He knows that fighting Wellington on ground of his choosing is dangerous. He's learnt that lesson. Napoleon, perhaps not having been there, kind of thinks, it's this guy with his overrated reputation. But it's one of those fascinating moments where, for all that Wellington is supposed to have said of Napoleon that his presence is worth 40,000 men?
Yeah, something
actually
like that.
Wellington's reputation equated to an entire army that wasn't even in the field. The crossroads was pretty much undefended. Had he moved in with the force that he had available to him, he could have rolled that position up in no time at all.
Oh yeah.
Then the Prussians are in even greater trouble. Wellington is trying to concentrate his force on a place that is occupied.
Yeah.
How is all of that going to work out? So I think he does the right thing at Quatre Bras, just at the wrong moment.
I think so too, yeah. I mean, he shows up the day before. He doesn't actually know where the rest of his wing of the army is, his two corps are. And like you say, he could have been audacious, like he would probably have been in the old days, like charging off at Jena and just starting the battle without Napoleon. But here he decides to be solid. He says, I'm going to I'm going to concentrate my forces. That's what the book says to do. And I'm going to wait until I have D'Erlon, I have Ray, and I think it was Ray's corps. And then I'm going to attack. I'm just going to mass as many men as I can, and then I'm going to attack, and I'll be able to do it properly, and I'll take it by the evening, and that'll be fine. Unfortunately, it's not. Like you say, it's a solid call. It's a good command call. But it just turns out to be the wrong one in that situation. And obviously he did well, like we said, he did well in Portugal. But as far as his Spanish and Portuguese fighting goes, that's what it is at. And because of that, like you say, he knew about Wellington. And therefore he thought he was doing the right thing to make sure he had irresistible force to be able to maximize his chances. And then, of course, at Waterloo, who knows what happened to Waterloo? The poor guy. I feel so sorry for Ney at Waterloo. He's basically left to command the battle himself.
Is he, though? Some people suggest that actually Napoleon suggests that Ney is given the left flank in order for Napoleon to kind of cover his own back, because a lot of people kind of talk about Napoleon and his style and say, look, realistically, would he have just said, here, there you go, take all of the cavalry, charge it off into the Allied lines without doing any prior reconnaissance? That's absolutely fine. And then continue to reinforce that failure on a battlefield that is incredibly condensed. And so plenty would say, yes, but this is Napoleon we're talking about. Would he really have allowed all of that to happen? I mean, boy,
it's baffling. It's baffling, isn't it? It makes no sense. How is Napoleon, who is nothing but a great attacker, how is he allowing this to happen? These mass cavalry charges, he can see them happening. Why is it not stopped?
Yeah, and equally, I would blame Ney for reinforcing failure.
Yes.
In
I mean,
sense.
That's absolutely true. I often defend Ney because Napoleon is in overall command. But at the same time, that is absolutely valid. What on earth are you thinking you're achieving here? It's like he can sense that he's actually putting a great deal of pressure on the center of Wellington's line. And you get the impression that he's feeling that just because he's getting those small percentages of success, i.e. inflicting great casualties and keeping Wellington there, that he should continue doing this in the hopes that he can get a break somewhere. I don't know.
But charging squares, everybody knows. The schoolboys almost kind of learn this. They don't quite learn this at school because we don't teach them the wars. But having said that, I actually did a lesson once with my students in the summer where we took them outside and I took them through some basics of Napoleonic infantry drill. And they learned very quickly that if you face cavalry, you must form square. So in a sense, even school kids know it's not going to end well.
Is it so? Yeah, it leaves the question open. Is it just he lost his? Is it just like his mental state allowed him to get so tunnel vision that he thought this was working? Or I mean, is that could be the only explanation for such egregious waste of men?
I mean, he does,
especially when
reinforcements. In fairness,
he does.
And Napoleon
that's the point I was going to make. Yeah, that was the point I was going to make. Though he makes that request once he takes Les Essarts. You don't need cavalry to take Les Essarts, and he takes it with infantry. So once he takes that, he actually begins putting pressure on properly. And he is forcing Wellington's center to withdraw back from the building. He is building up a pocket that can be used as a launching pad. The cavalry, does that have anything to do with the mass cavalry attacks?
It's difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, if he's in command of that wing, okay, he's responsible for maintaining the pressure on Les Essarts, which was certainly, I suppose you can argue one way or the other on whether that was the right call. Had the KGL received the ammunition that they needed, that was as much of a folly as the absolute mess that was Hougoumont. And so in a sense you could say, well, look, it's a question of luck there, just as the French were very nearly lucky at Hougoumont in being able to get round the back and get in the gate at the rear. It's not his finest hour, is it, Waterloo, by any means?
No.
But I mean, if we think about Busaco just for a moment, I don't think he really had a chance at Busaco. I mean, he's facing the Light Division, Bob Crawford in command. They're lying down. They're just waiting for the French to come.
It's all prepared. There's literally almost nothing to do. The maneuver is stand up, fire, charge, and that's all they need to do. Whereas the French have to climb up a hill on their hands and knees under skirmishing fire and artillery fire, get up in a column, can't deploy up. There's not enough room. It's not his fault that he gets sent to do this job. Yeah.
Okay, you choose the right man for the job because Ney's a great commander. He's an attacker. but I mean, Basaka Ridge, it's like this. But
Yeah.
people who are watching, who are listening, won't be able to see Basaka. It's almost a vertical climb. You know,
Yes.
it's not a position that you were sold.
I wasn't joking. They literally at points had to climb up there on their hands and knees. It's like using their hands to pull themselves up because it is actually so steep, and that's going to do terrible things to cohesion. And then you're met with canister fire at the top because they're right on top of them as soon as they get to the flat of the plateau of the ridge, the top of the ridge. And it's not his fault. He did all he could do. There's nothing else you could do. You can't take a position like that. I don't know how you take it. I guess you would need massive artillery support pounding that top of that ridge to stop the British from getting forward on it or something. I don't know. Or have so many columns going up it that they manage to find a hole in the line somewhere. But it's like, yeah, it's not. Massena just said, we're the French, we can beat them, go take the hill. And he tried.
He certainly did. And if we now switch back to Waterloo and a very poor piece of planning, apologies to listeners, and think about the aftermath. I mean, he made a rod for his own back by saying that he was going to bring Napoleon back in an iron cage,
Yes,
and then failing to do that. He was an impetuous guy, wasn't he?
He was.
Those kind of grand gestures.
He was again, loyalty here. Napoleon chose his man well. This guy was obviously Napoleon's man, even if he thought it was a lost cause. And there's every indication to think that he probably thought it was a lost cause. But he actually switched. No, I mean, what? I mean, after Waterloo, he is the guy who leads the revolt of the Marshals. It's him who puts Napoleon's arm behind his back and says that the army will follow its generals, abdicate, we have lost, and then comes back to him in 1815. And like we said with Victor, this is a poor choice, except out of some sense of loyalty to the person of Napoleon, because he feels guilty. I don't know.
No, it's bizarre, but he's executed for it ultimately.
Yes, because legally it is treason.
Yeah,
it's that's why, and he was made an example of because he's Ney, and because he was so egregiously traitorous to Louis that he actually went and turned his coat. He did the old-fashioned thing where he went on a mission for his king, and he didn't just ride off in the middle of the night from Paris. He actually took troops to Napoleon, and helped him overthrow King Louis. So that was the sad end of a very brave and loyal man.
It certainly is, and it's a sad note on which to end this episode. But for those of you who've enjoyed this, do not worry. We are going to continue in a few days' time. I mean, we're actually going to continue in 2 minutes' time, but you're going to have to wait a few days to enjoy that one, where we will be looking at Marmont, Jourdain, and Suchet. But in the meantime, I'm Zach White. This has been Boney's Boys in Spain from the Napoleonicist, featuring the brilliant Josh Provan. Thanks very much. Take care, my friends. Stay safe. And as always, thank you for listening.